A crack of thunder ripped through the night, jolting Georgia from her sleep. Her eyelids snapped open, and she found herself in an abyss of darkness. The room was pitch black, save for the faintest flicker of light from the storm outside, barely enough to distinguish the shadows. "Mommy?" Georgia's voice trembled, breaking the heavy silence that surrounded her. Her words felt small and swallowed by the night. She called again, her voice cracking, but nothing answered. The wind howled outside, making the trees bend under its weight, yet inside, the house was still. With hesitant movements, Georgia crawled out of bed, the cold floor sending a shiver up her spine. The wood felt damp under her bare feet as she padded toward her sister's bed, the air thick with the smell of rain seeping in from the window. "Natalie, are you awake?" Georgia whispered. Outside, the storm roared, violent and unrelenting. Thunder cracked so close the walls shuddered. A jagged flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting monstrous shadows over the floor. Barbies scattered like forgotten soldiers, but the light vanished just as quickly, leaving everything unclear, unsettling. Natalie shifted beneath the covers, a soft murmur escaping her, but she pulled tighter into her blanket, turning away from Georgia. Another thunderclap cracked overhead, louder this time, and Natalie gasped, her eyes snapping open. Her breath caught in her throat, then came out in short, ragged bursts. She began to cry softly, her chest heaving with sobs. Georgia swallowed hard, but her voice was steady. "Come on, Natalie, let's go find Mom and Dad." Together, they crept through the house. The wooden floorboards groaned under their bare feet, the old house seeming to exhale with each step, creaking and settling as though alive. They reached their parents' room first. The door creaked as it opened, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood filling the air, but the bed was perfectly made. No one lay in it. The sheets were untouched, the pillow plumped, everything exactly where it should be, but it felt wrong. Georgia's heart quickened. "Where are they?" she asked, turning away from the empty bed. They moved into the hallway. The darkness here was thicker, curling into the corners, swallowing everything. The quiet hum of electricity was gone. There were no creaks from the old pipes, no distant murmur of the refrigerator. It was like the house was holding its breath. The bathroom door loomed in front of them, and Georgia instinctively reached for the light switch. She flicked it several times, her hand lingering on the switch. The power had gone out with the storm. "Mom always leaves the lights on," Natalie said, as she reached for Georgia's arm. Georgia pushed open the bathroom door, half expecting to see the faint glow of light spilling out. Instead, the bathroom was engulfed in darkness. The shower curtain hung loosely, swaying with the draft from the window left cracked open. Her hand shook as she pulled back the curtain, the fabric brushing against her fingertips in an unsettling soft way. She jumped back as the dim flash of lightning illuminated the space, revealing only the usual shampoo bottles and a stray bath puff. The sound of thunder crackling in the distance made her heart stutter. "It's nothing," she said, more to herself than to Natalie. "Let's keep going." They pressed on, creeping into the living room. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching unnaturally in the faint light of the storm, and the curtains fluttered like they were caught in the wind. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and the musty smell of the house seemed to grow thicker, more pungent. Suddenly, a flash of lightning cut through the window, casting sharp, jagged shadows across the room. For just a second, Georgia thought she saw something move, a figure in the far corner of the room. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. But before she could say anything, another crack of thunder shattered the moment, and whatever it was had disappeared. "Georgia, did you see that?" Georgia didn't answer immediately. She had seen it too, but she didn't want to admit it. "It's nothing, just a shadow," she lied, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. They kept moving through the house, Natalie clinging to her big sister. The familiar rooms now felt cold and hostile. The kitchen, once bright and lively, now appeared dark and ominous. Only the sharp gusts of wind from outside and the relentless rain crashing against the windows filled the room with sound. Where could they be? Georgia asked again. The only place left was the basement. At the end of the hallway, the basement door stood ajar. The darkness beyond seemed to pull them, inviting them closer with an unsettling magnetism. Both girls paused, their feet rooted to the floor, staring at the door. The familiar warmth of their house now seemed miles away, replaced by the heavy sense of dread that wrapped itself around them. The dark space beyond the door seemed to pulsate with life, capable of consuming them entirely if they dared approach. I don't want to go down there, Natalie said, clutching Georgia's sleeve. Georgia didn't want to go down there either, but she had to. Something wasn't right, and she needed to know where their parents were. There's no other place they could be, Nat, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Why don't you just yell, Georgia? With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her hand gripping the cold brass handle of the door. She pulled it all the way open, the door creaking with an eerie groan. She called out into the abyss. Mom? Dad? Silence followed. The steps down into the basement loomed ahead, dark and daunting. Each one seemed to stretch further than it should have, and the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, weighed on them, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. They hesitated. Georgia's heart thundered in her chest as she peered into the oppressive blackness below. The storm continued to roar like a living thing, its wind howling against the windows and rattling the house. She called again, her voice trembling. Mom! Dad! Her words seemed to vanish the moment they left her lips, swallowed by the house. No response. Only the distant growl of thunder and the thrum of her pulse in her ears. Come on, Nat. Be brave. Her voice barely audible, though the words were more for herself than her sister. She took a cautious step onto the first stair, and it groaned beneath her, the sound unsettling. Natalie's fingers dug into George's arm. Another step. The stair creaked again. Slowly, hesitantly, Georgia descended further, each footfall amplified in the thick silence of the basement stairs. The air grew denser with every step, heavier, colder. The air held a musty scent, damp earth, old wood, and something else, something that made her skin crawl. The basement stretched below them, a yawning chasm of darkness that seemed to pull at them, its depth infinite. Her breath was shallow as they descended, each step a small eternity. Mom? Dad? Georgia's voice wavered. Georgia hesitated, her senses tingling with unease. She glanced over her shoulder at Natalie, who looked small in the dark shadows. I'm scared. Natalie's voice was tiny and strained. Her small hand trembled as it gripped Georgia's sleeve. Her wide eyes flicked around, taking in the shadows with innocent dread. It's so dark. I know. Georgia squeezed her sister's hand. The comfort of the touch did little to calm the rising tension in her chest. We'll check the laundry room first, and if they're not there, we'll go back upstairs, okay? They moved further into the shadows. The basement spread around them, an endless maze of forgotten things, old boxes, unused furniture, and cobwebs clinging to everything. A flash of lightning lit the space for just a heartbeat, casting shadows on the walls. I think I saw something. Natalie's voice broke the silence, high-pitched and trembling. Georgia swallowed hard, trying to ignore the sense that something was lurking in the dark. It was nothing, she said, but she didn't believe it. They reached the laundry room, and Georgia's fingers brushed the cold wood of the doorframe, her heart racing. Mom? She called again, but her voice barely made it past her lips. No answer, no sound. Only the pounding of her heart and the distant thunder that seemed to grow louder, closer with every passing second. The weight of the silence was unbearable. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from above. The house trembled, the walls shaking with a deep, resonating force. The girls froze, their breaths caught in their throats. "What was that?" Natalie asked. The terror in her voice was clear. Her wide eyes locked onto Georgia's, searching for reassurance that Georgia didn't have. "Shh," Georgia whispered, her heart pounding as she scanned the room. The washing machine and dryer stood motionless, their cold metallic surfaces gleaming eerily in the dim light. The darkness pressed in on them, suffocating, waiting. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Not their parents, not the soft, comforting tread they knew. These were different. These were wrong. A loud bang came again from upstairs. Far away, a muffled shout, distant and garbled, twisted in the air. The words were incomprehensible, but the fear they carried was clear. It was a voice, but not one they recognized. It sent a chill racing down Georgia's spine. They stood frozen. Georgia's breath quickened, her mind racing. "Natalie, we have to hide." Natalie nodded without a word, her face pale and strained. In a flash, she grabbed Georgia's arm and pulled her toward the cold room, a hidden space behind their dad's workbench that Georgia hadn't thought of in years. They stumbled toward it, the storm now a constant presence, pressing in with every flash of lightning, every creak of the house. The door to the cold room groaned as they opened it. The air that hit them was an icy slap to their faces, sharper than anything they had felt before. It was as if the room had been frozen in time. A shiver ran down Georgia's spine as the musty scent of dust and mildew enveloped her. She stepped inside reluctantly. "I don't know about this." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. The house was alive with the storm's fury, rattling the walls and shaking the very foundations. "We'll be safe here," Natalie's voice cracked with fear. She pulled Georgia further into the room, toward the back cupboards. Another boom of thunder, a sharp crack that rattled the walls, and the ground beneath them seemed to vibrate. The air was thick and oppressive, each breath they took heavy with fear. The first cupboard was full of canned goods, nothing more. They moved to the next one, but it was stuck, the door stubbornly refusing to open. "We can't make any noise," Georgia said, but Natalie wasn't listening. She yanked the door open with all her strength, and it creaked loudly, as if protesting. "See? We'll be safe," Natalie said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. They crawled inside and shut the door behind them, plunging them into darkness. The only sound was the ragged rhythm of their breathing, both fast and shallow. The ceiling above creaked. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house. The floor groaned under each step. The noise came closer and closer. "Shh," Georgia whispered, her fingers pressed tightly against Natalie's lips. The footsteps stopped at the basement door. Georgia held her breath as they began down the stairs, each step growing louder until they reached the bottom. Then silence. The house seemed to hold its breath with them. They waited, straining to hear which way the footsteps would go next. The silence stretched until slowly the footsteps moved in their direction. "Girls, where are you?" The voice came through the darkness, but it wasn't quite right. It sounded like their father, but the warmth was gone. The door to the cold room creaked open, the sound sharp and hollow echoing off the cupboard. Georgia's heart pounded, each beating like a drum in her chest. Fear clawed at her throat. "I think they found us," her voice breaking under the weight of terror. Then Natalie's laughter erupted, a strange, high-pitched giggle that sent a wave of nausea through Georgia. The sound echoed unnervingly in the cramped space. "Natalie, stop!" But her giggles didn't stop. They grew louder, more frantic, more desperate. The voice called again, twisted and wrong. "Natalie?" Georgia held Natalie tight. "Stop laughing, Natalie." "I can't help it." Natalie's giggles turned to sobs. "Natalie." The name was strained, distorted, filled with a kind of hunger that churned in Georgia's stomach. "Daddy?" Natalie called out. Georgia closed her eyes. "It's not him," Georgia whispered, pulling Natalie close as the footsteps grew louder, faster. They stopped abruptly. And then came a sudden sharp knock at the cupboard door. Georgia stifled a scream. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, this isn't the right time," they heard their mother's voice, tense, laced with warning. "Go back upstairs and get cleaned up." Georgia listened as the footsteps retreated, followed by the groan of the basement stairs as the figure ascended. The cupboard door creaked open, the darkness pressing in. A hand shot out, grabbing at them, pulling, but Georgia planted her feet, fighting against the force, refusing to be taken. "Georgia, stop kicking! It's me!" "Mom?" Georgia called. "Yes, Georgia, who else would it be?" her mother said. Georgia's vision blurred with tears, her body trembling as she whispered, "But we couldn't find you." "We were in the barn," her mother said, brushing Georgia's hair from her face with a tenderness that made Georgia's breath catch. "We never meant to scare you. Come on out." Her mother pulled her close. "The storm came. We tried to wait out the rain in the barn. We didn't think you girls would end up hiding." Georgia felt her mother's heartbeat, steady and strong, vibrating through her body, grounding her. For a brief, intoxicating moment, Georgia let herself melt into the embrace. She was safe. "Oh, Nat, are you okay?" Her mother pulled Natalie into a tight embrace. Natalie's sobs muffled as she buried her face in her mom's chest, and her mother gently stroked her hair, offering soft, comforting murmurs. Her mother's voice dipped, growing soft but tight. "I'm sorry, honey, but you weren't supposed to be wandering through the house. It's not safe," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "Not tonight." Georgia's spine stiffened, an icy tendril of unease crawling up her neck. She pulled away, glancing over her shoulder, searching for the thing, the wrongness that had been there only moments ago, the footsteps, the knock at the cupboard door, the creeping, heavy presence. But the basement was empty. Only shadows. The air, previously suffocating, now appeared thin, brittle. Georgia swallowed, her pulse racing as she looked back at her mother, her eyes wide. And then she saw it. On the corner of her mouth, smeared on her chin, blood. Georgia's breath caught. The warmth that had been comforting moments ago was gone. Her mother's touch had changed. The weight of her hands now felt as if it was holding Georgia in place, pressing her against something cold and sharp. She looked up, her eyes locking with her mother's. Why was there blood on her mouth? She recoiled, but her feet were rooted to the floor, the weight of the air around her holding her in place. The air thickened, pressing in on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The shadows were all around now, thick and inky. They crawled at the edges of her skin, reaching for her. Georgia's legs gave out. She stumbled backward, gasping for air, her chest constricting painfully. "Georgia, are you okay?" Her mother's arms encircled her, holding her close. But Georgia winced, afraid the blood would smear onto her skin. "Mommy, what were you eating?" Natalie's innocent voice cutting into the thick tension. "Eating?" Their mom's gaze flickered briefly. She wiped her mouth, her tongue flicking out to lick the blood from her fingertips with unnerving calmness. "Can I have some?" Natalie asked, eyes wide with childlike curiosity. Her mother laughed softly. Not tonight, honey. Your dad and I had a little snack out in the barn. Like in the summer? The summer? Her mother's voice was too sharp. What do you mean, Natalie? I saw Daddy bring the boy into the barn. George's heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? Then you and Aunt Sally and Uncle Gerald, you went into the barn at night. What boy? George's voice trembled with unease. Nothing, honey. Don't worry about your sister. I saw you, Mummy, Natalie said, her voice unnervingly firm. You had red stuff on your mouth. Her mother's smile faltered for the briefest moment. She straightened, her eyes cold. Natalie, that's enough for tonight. Mom, Georgia said, her voice shaking, what is she talking about? They ate the boy, Natalie said, her words heavy with truth. Natalie, what are you talking about? What were you doing out of the house? I wasn't out of the house, Mummy. I saw from my window when Daddy opened the barn door, at the table that we aren't allowed near. A flicker of something dark flashed across their mother's face. Her lips stretched into a slow, knowing smile, one that sent chills racing down George's spine. The time will come soon enough for you girls to understand, but for now, let's get some sleep. And then, the house shook again, the walls groaning under some unseen weight, the floor shifting beneath them, and in that instant, Georgia realized it was no longer just the storm she had to be afraid of. Her parents, these people, were not who she believed them to be. How many evenings did Aunt Sally and Uncle Gerald visit? Many. Is this what they did after her and Natalie would go to bed? Nausea clawed its way up her throat. This was something that would never let them go. The truth sank into her like a cold, sharp blade, and she felt the world tilt. And then the darkness pressed in, swallowing everything around her.